Hello, it's Peter Wright and Kathleen Beauvais from Ontario, Canada, with another episode of the Yakking Show. This is the show this is the show that provides you with a greater range of ideas and actionable business tips than you'll find virtually anywhere else in one place on the internet. We always have interesting guests for you. Today will be no exception. But first, let me introduce co-host Kathleen Beauvais from down the road in Waterloo, Ontario. Hi, Kathleen. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Peter. Thank you so much. And thank you all so much for tuning into our show. We so appreciate you and we love reading your comments. So please keep those coming. And if anyone is interested in being a guest on our show, please visit our website at theyakkingshow.com. Click on the contacts tab and simply fill in a very short application form. We would love to hear from you. So as Peter mentioned, we do have another special guest with us today. Her name is Jodi Williams. Hello, Jodi. How are you? Welcome to the show.
I'm good, thanks. Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Oh, well, we're happy to have you. This is going to be such an interesting conversation, folks, because Jodi is a end-of-life doula. And a doula, for those of you who are not familiar with the term, is a companion to the dying and their loved ones. They are a non-medical person who gives support physically, emotionally, and spiritually to someone else. The end-of-life doula's role is to be a supportive presence to the dying and their loved ones. So, Jodi, just to begin, give us a little bit about your background and what led you to become an end-of-life doula?
Yeah, so it's definitely one of those things that you don't really grow up thinking, I want to do that type thing. But my dad had cancer over 20 years ago and ended up in palliative care. And just seeing, spending time and seeing you wait for hours for someone to come by and, reaching out for someone, like there's long legs in between, right? So since that time, after his passing, in and out of visiting other friends and other people in hospitals, you see, and then especially as we all know with COVID, how things have just got so much worse. Right. To no one's specific fault that works in this industry, but everyone's just run so ragged. So during COVID, I had, previous to being a doula, I did support persons with autism group homes, and I was working a lot more from home, and I started doing some online training on things of interest. And I just came across, after a couple other trainings I was doing on doula givers, I found that, and they first offered a day of free training. So I went into that and just was immediately interested and hooked. And right from the beginning of the training, she goes, when you know, right? It's not something like after the first 10 minutes that people are going to be comfortable with and think of it as something, they want to do. So I ended up doing the whole training, and that was kind of, how it all started, very kind of stumbled upon the idea of it. Yeah.
Well, it is definitely it takes a very special individual to do what you do. So, kudos to you for that, Jodi, really.
I appreciate that.
Sure. Oh, excuse me. So for those in our audience, as Kathleen said, many probably don't know what an end-of-life doula does. What are the range of services you provide then, Jodi?
Yeah, so as you can imagine, everybody needs things a little bit different, but I really try hard to provide support specifically to what the family and the dying person needs, like their beliefs and, what their needs are, because everyone has different, some people stay at home, some people are already in hospice or in the hospital. So after, I get in touch with people, then you just go from there, and I can explain what I can do. I can do anything from just doing advanced care plans to setting up steps so everyone's aware of what their wants and needs are. And so it's a little bit more of a formalized process, so everyone's on the same page. I can just sit vigil when the family's, busy and catching up on their own lives, and when they're exhausted and you want to give them a break, right? And just kind of help them out that way. It can help with even light household chores and do groceries if they don't want to do it, things like that. I can help with funeral planning. I can help with the individual write some letters. Some people, it's hard to say things in person, or there's people that aren't able to visit, that type of thing, when hype letters. And that usually grows. There's usually a lot of conversations that can come up with the person unwell of their guilt, right? People always know, I should have done this, I wish I did that. So working through that, which at the end does help resolve to have what can be known as a good death, right? You feel a little more relieved and more resolved, and you're settled, which makes it a lot easier on the family as well.
Do you also help? You mentioned that you help with funeral planning, but there's also institutions that need to be contacted. Do you help with that, or at least plan out?
Yeah, it's more like getting the resources, because usually the family, they're overwhelmed enough as it is, right? So
Sure.
I'm just getting some phone numbers and email addresses, that type of thing, get organized for them. Yeah, or help write eulogies, those little things where there's already so much going on, and feelings and emotions are everywhere. So just try and keep people on track. And
so you get on board from the moment somebody picks up the phone and says, I have somebody in palliative care. We would really love your services, but you're there from that point right up until,
if that's what the family wishes. Some, it could be they just want help with the advanced care plan, which is fine, and they're okay to continue on their own from that point. So
and when you say an advanced care plan, what is involved in saying a care plan? What are some of the things?
Yeah, so there's a wide range in those kinds of questions. And there's a lot of good websites if everyone wants to look up to you can print those off, they're free. And it's just really a variety of questions ranging from, the big questions like, do you want to be monitored in the hospital? Do you want to be hooked up, to breathing and eating, all those kinds of things, to like simple basic things like, if you're not feeling well, do you want certain type of music playing, or do you want a certain scent in the room, right? Different things. If you're not able to have your voice anymore, you don't want someone in there, like a caregiver coming in spraying like a rose scented that you don't like, right? So even those little details go a long way. Or just like I said, like music, like you could be someone putting some nice music they think is relaxing for you, but what if you hate opera, right? So it's nice to have a really thorough, right, information where anybody can easily reach out and see what your preferences are when you don't longer have your voice.
And you're not just in the home with a family. You're if the person is in a long-term care facility or palliative in a hospice or even at the hospital, you can still get involved. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely.
So do you find that people are becoming more receptive to having the presence of a doula to assist a loved one in the end of life?
Yeah, so since it is still a fairly new right area to be in, I do have to there's a lot of explaining and always when I do kind of explain, and you always have to keep in mind, even death, people usually get their backs up, so explain gentle and go into it. Mostly the reaction, like 99%, is like, oh, I wish I knew this from before, or when my grandmother, my aunt, right? People have all these stories. I didn't know there was such a thing, right? So it is, getting that word out a lot. So that's the main thing right now, is like educating and advocating that, there's people out there to help and there's support, and we can take a little bit of that stress off of you. So it's getting there. It's not where it needs to be, where everyone just, oh yeah, I know somebody, or I use that, right? Because it is so new.
Right.
Yeah.
So, Jodi, what's the history of people using an end-of-life doula in North America? I would guess if we were to go back 200 years or more, a lot of what you do was done by a priest in conjunction with older family members, because communities were more sort of tightly knit. And that, of course, changed after the Industrial Revolution. So what's the history been?
Yeah, definitely. So still in many countries outside of North America, it is still a lot of the family members, right? Like a lot of family members still live all together. And so North America, as we know, it's just become fast paced and go, go, go. And if you can't take care of your senior family members anymore, right, you're kind of just put into a resident care home. That's kind of the way of where we are right now. So I think initially things started around 2017. There was a group of people that came together with different backgrounds and experiences. And it's a National End-of-Life Doula Alliance Association. And they created, this information to get out there and start training doulas as a profession. So it started primarily in the States. And because I think it's taken off in the States a bit quicker, because they're very used to paying for their medical care is so different. They pay if they need to see a physio, right? Physio, chiropractor, those kind of things. Where in Canada, a lot of occupations that can be covered, right, with some medical care, where doula care is not yet in Canada. So that's kind of the bit of obstacle we have more in Canada. But definitely, getting the information out there is a big piece, and sharing the word. There is definitely, even I've noticed, like more of like a death awareness, things that I've come across that you hear once. Every so often you hear something like there's an article in the paper or a magazine or a movie and they're mentioning doulas. You're like, ah, right. It's exciting because it's, this is what we need to get out there, and it should be a common conversation, right?
Right.
You don't need to wait until, grandpa's dying.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I'm curious, if I were to call you up in the event of a loved one that's in palliative care, what steps would you first take with me? Just so that gives our listeners an idea of what to expect when they pick up the phone and call you for the first time.
Yeah, so I think it's very important to meet in person. You try and do that because, right, most likely the person's in a bit of shock.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And they're, very delicate emotions. So you meet, and it's very important to try and meet like where the person is. Like there could be stages from like they're in disbelief, they don't believe it, or they think the diagnosis can change. Right. There's some of that, or they have no idea what to do. Or some people are very, very, very open and welcome. Yeah, whatever. Like, let's walk this through right from the beginning. They want to make steps. So wherever that person is at that first meeting, right, kind of I gauge from there and let them kind of guide what they need at that point, what we can start planning small steps and see how far we need to go. But then, and going through all the things I can help them with, and also giving them a bit of information on what to expect. Because if no one's been around someone very ill, like there's stages, right, everybody goes through, like I said, initially you have some shock, right? And then hopefully there's a little bit of understanding that comes with that. And then during the transition phase, when someone is so ill, you see they're going to fade away, and that's totally normal and natural, and it's to be expected, right? And they are going to not have as much energy. They're going to be more bedridden, like all those steps. So people are a little bit more prepared when they see it coming.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So what are some of the big changes you've seen since you got involved in 2017 in the way that end of life is being handled? There's been big changes?
Yeah, so I think just kind of like what I mentioned, I do see here and there, like mentioned in movies. There's been a couple movies about specifically around doula care, and in some articles and stuff. And at first I kind of thought it was, when like you first have a new car, you see everybody else with that car, or, when you first have your baby, you're pregnant, you see everybody else that's pregnant. So I thought it was kind of that, because all of a sudden I'm hearing, but the more you look into it, you see these are all newer articles and newer movies, which didn't happen before. So even books, there's more books being written, even just not even like fiction and nonfiction. So it is coming a lot more to the forefront in the news, which is really nice. And right, it's what needs to happen. And there's also a really good outlet for people who haven't heard about, like I said, the death movement. There is a death cafe that started, so if you're familiar with. So that's also a really good starting point. I like to even tell people who don't need my services or just don't have anybody in their family who is unwell, but just to kind of have a safe place to have a discussion about death and questions, and just listen and feel, where you can learn a little bit, you can feel a little bit better, and realize most important thing is to make the most of your finite life, because as we all know, this is inevitable. It's going to happen. We should be planning for it.
That's right. That's right.
Go ahead, Peter.
No, I was going to ask Jodi, being in Cambridge, at one time we gave a bit of help to I think it was called a home hospice movement, and they wanted a little bit of help from us on the organizational side, I think, going back a few years. And then we had so much on our plate, we had to leave them to their own devices. Are they still going? Do you know? Is that something
I'm
that's
basically
happening?
more involved with like Lazard and Innisfree Hospice. I have visited the one in Guelph as well. And there's a Wellington one. So there's a lot of different names out there, but they're all wonderful, wonderful places. And that's the other thing, when you see the families come there and they don't realize, they're like, oh, I didn't even know these places existed, right? Until you have someone in your life, they don't realize this is an option. And it's such a relief when the families come in and see, there's nurses 24/7 and care, and they can just come and visit, spend quality time, go home and take care of themselves, right? Which is so important, right? So that they're lovely, lovely places.
Yeah, very good.
So, Jodi, I have to ask you, how are you able to distance yourself emotionally at the end of the day when you go home from such an emotionally charged experience?
Yeah, so I've heard a lot from that. My kids right away were the first, like, because I'm very easy. I'm someone I cry at movies and emotional person. But he's explained, if something is sad happens, it's okay to cry. That's very natural. And if this is a time, right, to be emotional, this is it. But also realizing, because I know this is like, it's a field, it's something I've chosen to do. So I'm not completely personally invested, right? I don't take everything personal. So I can leave at the end of the day and realize, hopefully did the best I could, right? Hope they feel a little bit more comforted and supported. And there's lots of, I've also been always been really good in my previous career of coming back and trying to separate yourself and just like reading and walking, having a bath. Like I'm okay making me time, I know like how to come home and find things that are just for me. And I'm okay to tell friends and family if I need support or if I just want to be alone for a bit, right? Like I just want to, don't come into the bathroom for 2 hours. I've got the candles and the bubble bath going, everything, right? You find your ways. And that's the most important thing for also we tell the family and the caregivers that take care of yourself first, right? Because you're no good to anyone else if you're overwhelmed, which is of course inevitable, but right, make sure you're eating and getting a bit of exercise, fresh air. Yeah, it all helps.
So are you, towards the end, are you on call?
Yeah. So I can also explain because we've got other things that could be going on. You just always be open in front with the families. Like from this, this day, I've got a previous commitment, if it's an appointment or something with the family, right? Just let them know, and you try and work that flow because they set some boundaries at the beginning as well, saying, I can't just, if you have a quick question or someone needs a Tylenol, right? Like I try and give them the tools. They're able to make decisions on their own and they can reach me when I can reach me. But of course, it's going to be those times when it's not expected or it's an odd time of day. And that's fine. Like it comes with the role.
Right.
Yeah, you can't plan for everything. Yeah.
So I've got one that just came to me while you were talking there. You can hear from my accent, I haven't been in Canada all my life. I grew up in Africa, and in part of Africa that was quite violent, went through a terrorist war, and was accustomed to a lot of sudden death. I once went to 4 funerals in 1 week, for example, and we seem to have a much more, I don't know what it is, acceptance of death than I find in North America. And I'm not knocking North America, don't get me wrong, but I find here people, you mentioned earlier, people don't like the word death. So when I was brought up, he died, she died. No, they didn't pass away, they died. That was it, So I notice it's a lot treated a lot more softly here. Do you notice a big difference in the way people approach death from the different cultures that you're probably exposed to?
Yes, definitely. You can tell, like most again, like North American, like some people are even just comfortable coming to visit their family members they haven't seen for a while, and it's like go in and sit with them, hold their hand. Where other cultures, they want to, they want to wash the body, and you know what I mean. There's a lot of like ceremonies and things that they're very comfortable with, and they're expected to do when they've grown up with it. So, and it's lovely to see, like a lot of learn, like it's amazing, and that's how it should be, right? It's a part of life that's going to happen, right? Like,
of course.
Talking about it, planning for, what would that person like to see when that happens? Who do they want around them to do some maybe intimate care and stuff, and let them make that decision. But yeah, here it's very much, like I said, we hide people away a lot of the times, and it's hush hush. And what did I hear in the States? That there's over 70 million people will be seniors in the next couple of years. And right, there's a chunk of them in care, a chunk of them don't have their own kids, right? Who's going to be taking care of them? And yeah, it's a scary time. So any conversations you can have about it prior are all so necessary. Like I even have, there is a card deck called the death game, a card deck that I brought out with my kids, and at first they're mortified, but at the end you have fun. It's like, who would you, all kind of random questions, who would you want to be singing the song, or who would you not want to be there? Do you want the pets there? Do you not want the pets? Like, and then they can grow into bigger conversations, and it's a very natural conversation that happens, and and there's no reason not to.
Do you find that the older generations are better prepared materially? They have their affairs tidied up better than younger people, or not necessarily?
Well, yeah, mainly I just haven't had a lot of experience with the younger generations who are at that stage in life. Right. So, because that's more like a sudden thing where they don't really reach out because you can't really plan the sudden, right?
Sure.
So
I just,
that's the case.
I just got to relate very quickly the case of my mother, who died 10 years ago at the age of 90. And she was in England, and I'd visited her just before, a few weeks before she died, and then I left. And my brother and his daughters looked after her. And when I was there, she said, "You don't have to worry, everything's prepared. In this envelope is all the name of all, a list of accounts and emails and phone numbers and passwords." And she had everything worked out. So when she died, it was really easy for them. They just
So
went through the list
helpful.
and bang, 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 done, and this is who you've got to contact. So they found that very easy. And I would hope I would leave my kids with something as simple as well,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
here's one for you. What's one word of advice you'd have for a family member who's suddenly diagnosed with a terminal illness?
Yeah, I think, that's hard. There's some things you want to reassure them with, but I think the big thing is a lot of people think once someone appears to be sleeping all the time, they're not really aware or know, but they can still hear you. There's times you play a certain song and a little smile comes on their face, right? So talk to them, just keep talking. They know you're there. Tell them things that if you want it, you need to forgive them for something. Tell them you're thankful, for them being in your lives. Tell them how much you love them. Like, keep talking and telling them these things. They'll hear you. Yeah.
That's good. And again, I know with my mother when she was in hospital, and I phoned, and she couldn't talk to anybody, but they one of their kids put the phone next to her, and I spoke to her, and they said she definitely reacted. So you're quite right. People can understand.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, that's interesting. Thanks for that, Kathleen. Back to you.
So Jodi, how do people contact you, and what areas are you servicing?
Yeah, so I'm in the Cambridge area, but I'm also okay to, expand that a bit. And, we're also tightly close, like to Waterloo, even Hamilton, Kitchener, Guelph areas, right? So those are all totally region I would go to. I have my website is all one word, doulapeaceofmind.com.
Okay.
And you can also find me on Facebook under Peace of Mind, End-Of-Life Doula Services.
Peace of Mind, End-Of-Life Services.
Doula Services.
Doula Services. Okay. We will make note of that. And my goodness, thank you so very much for being on the show today. We so appreciated having you, Jodi.
That's great. I'm very glad to be able to share this time with you.
Well,
very important service, definitely. And again, from my background, closer families, closer communities, I can, having been exposed to the North American way of life for nearly 20 years now, I can see why people need your services here. I definitely can. So good job you're doing. Thank you very much, Jodi.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. And thank you again for tuning into our show. And until next time, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Wow.